Okay, well, for the past few weeks, with, of course, the exception of last week, in which we celebrated Resurrection Sunday, we've been talking about letting go. We've covered letting go of fear, letting go of guilt and blame, and letting go of shame. And today, I'd like for us to continue this discussion as we talk about letting go, part 4. Grief. Now, grief is a deep sorrow. It's a mourning. It's usually in response to the loss of someone who is close to you, someone who you hold dear. And while it's generally thought of as something bad, grief simply is. In fact, in our feel-good society today, we tend to cover up grief with thoughts or with activities that help us to not feel so bad, help us to not feel that deep sorrow. And that suppressed grief, what it does is it lodges in the heart and it obstructs the flow of unconditional, non-conceptual love. In the book of Genesis, we have a good example of this, and we find the story of Joseph. His father Jacob loved him dearly, but his brothers, not so much. In fact, they were going to kill him, but one of his brothers convinced them to think of something else to do instead of taking his life, and so they sold him into slavery instead. Now, they couldn't just tell their father when he asked about where Joseph was. They couldn't just say, well, Dad, we sold him as a slave. No big deal. So instead, they killed an animal and tore his jacket and the coat of many colors that his father had made for him. And they dipped that coat into the dead animal's blood. And let's pick up the story from there. And this is Genesis chapter 37, starting with verse 32. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Grief fills the heart, and if it gets stuck there or pushed down, then the heart retains that blockage, and life can no longer freely flow. And perhaps that is why in the Jewish culture, mourning was celebrated. There was a period of time that was set apart for mourning, and it was mourning on steroids, you could say. And when the time for mourning came to an end, life went on. So there was an unspoken expectation that one would hold on to grief and fully feel it with all of their being. And then they would let it go. Now, of course, that letting go didn't necessarily happen, but it was a really good idea. So what happens with grief and grieving today? Well, we naturally try to make people feel better. We try to give them comfort, and that's fine. The Holy Spirit, after all, is our comforter, is he not? And In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 4, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." But the truth is, when people have grief, they need to mourn. True mourning is the expression of the inner feeling of grief. Fully feeling it, fully expressing it, fully letting it be, without trying to make it go away. And if you have experienced grief, but you have not allowed yourself to fully feel it, and express it, and let it exist as it is, then chances are that it's still stuck somewhere inside. And it most certainly is impeding the flow of love and life to some degree. And today the invitation is for you to become free. You know, we tend to run away from negative feelings, don't we? But at the same time, while we're running away from them, we give them energy. We give energy to the generation of those feelings, which are kept alive by compulsive thinking. So the mind generates feelings of grief, and at the same time, the mind covers up those feelings and labels them as bad, which turns them into a type of emotional cancer that can eat away at the inner fountains of love and life. Or you could say it blocks that flow, kind of like a rock slide. It causes emotional debris, and it often pollutes the life flow that does get through. As Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23 says, "Keep watch over your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the springs of life." Now, let's not get all hung up here on the word heart, out of your heart. If I'm not mistaken, the word heart is translated in another language as kidneys. What it means basically is the center, the inside. So in other words, keep inwardly clean and clear, because life, like a river, flows from within. And to keep emotions from getting stuck and from blocking the flow of life, you learn to stay present. When a feeling comes, whether it is something small or it's overwhelming grief, accept that it is. Allow it to be. Don't fight against it. Don't try to cover it up. Now, of course, it's helpful if you don't keep generating the feeling with thoughts, or more accurately, if you don't stay inside the head, giving the mind the attention and the power to keep dwelling on thoughts that generate those feelings. Now, of course, this is going to require honesty within yourself. You need to be inwardly, completely honest. Are you addicted to those feelings? Maybe without knowing it. Probably without knowing it. Of course, no one consciously wants to feel bad, but we unknowingly become addicted to the emotional energy. The emotions are not expressed, and they're constantly fed, and they grow into a creature almost with a mind of its own. You might notice when somebody, for example, drinks too much alcohol, or they encounter a situation that resonates with that trapped emotion, or that trapped emotional entity, you could say, they can sometimes seem like a completely different person, can they not? Almost like they're possessed by that emotional creature. And the truth is, they actually are possessed, you could say. Possessed by that trapped emotional entity. But, you can, of course, be free. Isn't that what Jesus came to? I have come to give them life in overflowing abundance, freedom, flowing life. Now, most of us are familiar with this passage from Isaiah chapter 53, but let's take another look at it and see if there's anything that we might have missed that we could apply to our topic today. Isaiah chapter 53, verses 4 through 6. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Okay, did you catch that? Of course, we think we understand verse 5. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. And we claim freedom from and forgiveness for sin, healing from sickness and disease, whether that's on the inside or the outside or both, and the peace that his sacrifice bought for us. But we started reading with these words: he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. What does that mean? Well, you're probably familiar with 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 13. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others who have no hope. Now, there's really no need for me to expound much upon that now, but just the knowledge that death is not the end, they're just sleeping, can help the grieving to not be so bitter. However, even with that mental knowledge, we still get the emotion of grief stuck inside. It happens all the time. And it blocks the river of life from flowing clean and free. But Jesus has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, just like the sickness and the sins that he carried to the cross. He also took our griefs and our sorrows in just the same way. So, when the feelings of grief arise and waves of sorrow wash over you, what do you do? Do you go into your head for comfort, maybe for distraction? Well, I thought the Spirit and the presence of God was supposed to be our comforter, not some mental distraction. Of course, the Spirit of God implies presence here and now. Or do you go into your head and think about how you should not be feeling those feelings because Jesus already bore them? Well, go ahead and do that if you want to make those emotions a sad, repressed creature inside of you that possesses you from time to time in strange and destructive ways, or just numbs some of the life that you experience. Or you could just allow the feeling to be as it is. Experience it fully. Express it freely. Don't think about it or make it grow by entertaining and dwelling on the mind's chatter about it, but let it flow. Embrace it. Go deeply into it. Fully experience it. Feel the feeling in your body. It might be a weight on the chest, a tightness in the throat. Just feel it. Feel, where is that feeling? And then go into it. Don't think about it. Feel it. Experience. Let it be. And see what happens to it. You just might find that it is transmuted into something else. You just might find that it is cleansing and freeing, and that life and love flow with it, becoming one with it, transforming it. Blessed are those who mourn, who actually go into the feeling, because in doing so they will be comforted. Be present with it, without labeling it, without conceptualizing it. Just feel it fully and let it flow. And not in an attempt to change it or to escape it, but just to feel it with no reason whatsoever. What do I mean about that? Well, the same way that a fully content person would feel the sunshine on his face, or the cool rain falling on her shoulders, or the chilly wind stinging their cheeks. Just feeling it, just because it is. Just letting it be as it is, without trying to change it or labeling it as bad or good. And that contentment, which is rooted in peace, in the peace of being fully present in the temple of God, that brings true freedom. And it keeps that emotion from blocking the flow of life and love found in the eternal present moment here with God. And I would like to close with this verse from Revelation chapter 21 and verse 4. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. You know, we hold on to memories of the past, but we do have that promise. And this will happen as a direct result of the unhindered, fully seen presence of God. But remember, the kingdom of God is where? In the future? Some other place? No, it's right now, and it is right here inside of you. And the God of that kingdom has filled your body with his holy presence. And when you dwell there in the present eternal, or the heavenlies, not in the mind, but in the temple, then that same presence does what presence does. It wipes away every tear. It removes the illusion of death. It transforms sorrow and grieving from heavy burdens into fleeting waves that come as they come and pass through you, unhindered, not restricted, not fought against, not held onto mentally so as to solidify inside the temple, but they're freely allowed to completely come and then completely go. And only the never-ending and all-pervasive peace and joy remain.